Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode, like all episodes, brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow the show on the social media at Facebook and Twitter at SWGM Podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Like, subscribe, share at Savage Worlds Game Master Podcast, and the same moniker on iTunes. Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Tonight, we want to give a shout out to a brand new patron, Savage Oz. Welcome aboard. And feel free to support the show at Patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. Tonight's topic, Checklist Session 0. And here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
Dustin, the Savage Intern Smith.
I think you'll find the shield generator is quite operational. Ha-ha.
Some call him Jib.
Yeah.
And returning Scott W., the Savage Cheerleader, a.k.a. Disembowel.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was supposed to say something.
Yeah, great pod.
Great pod.
So if you're watching the live stream on YouTube, feel free to participate in the chat. We do include that in the show and refer to it. So Session 0. I know we've had the Session 0 conversation before. This is actually a pitch by a Patreon asking us to actually share our checklist as if we're prepared enough to have a checklist. But
we don't need no stinking checklist, man.
I think tonight we're going to kind of run down and talk about if you're running for a brand new group and you're doing a Session 0, let's have a checklist and kind of run it down a little bit and kind of highlight which each one of us thinks really should belong in your table's Session 0 checklist. Anybody want to jump in with a topic?
I say we start with the contentious one for the green room and go from there. Burn the bitch down right out the gate.
Okay, so let's go ahead and throw this out, and in the spirit of debate, let's have the conversation. I'm not a fan of the X card. I believe that if there's something in your game that is disturbing to somebody, you should feel comfortable enough or free enough at the table to just put your hand up and go, "This makes me uncomfortable."
So do you start your sessions with sort of generic, right? Like, hey, are there any topics you'd like to avoid? Like anything sexual, anything hyper torturous? Do you do that?
I don't necessarily.
That's something on your checklist.
I don't necessarily. I try to set an expectation for the style and tone and tenor of what the game is that we're about to play. So, for example, anybody's watched the show Zombie. I'm going to talk about we're running a typical standard Romero zombie, people eating flesh, character death being an issue. To me, part of that implies that we're going to maybe have a narrative description of somebody being eaten alive. As just part of the basic expectation of what.
Okay, so that's one topic. And it usually doesn't bother most gamers.
I know where I come down on that one is I don't say, hey, this game might include X, and I don't ask, hey, is there anything you don't want the game to include? But with that said, when I've got a new player, I will give them kind of a theme and tone direction. Like, hey, this is a pretty grim, gritty game. Be aware there's going to be some adult content. If you're uncomfortable with anything, just let us know, and we can, bypass it. And I think that type of disclaimer for me has always worked. I haven't had to say, well, this game's going to include sexual molestation, a lot of gunfights in schools, and I don't have to lay out specific like plot point moments that could arise that I know are going to arise because, quite frankly, I don't know what's going to happen. If the player characters decide to pull out an Uzi near a school, well, there's going to be a gunfight near a school, and if that causes a problem for you, you need to raise your hand and say, "Hey, guys, this is not an okay topic for the game," and we will find a way to steer the game away from that as a group. It's not. I don't consider it my job to be the one to to control whether or not those topics come up, yeah, I might throw something out, but one of the players could just as easily, decide they're going to, I don't know, drug and rape a woman in an RV next to where the rest of the party is standing. And as a GM, I'm facilitating a game where if everyone's comfortable with that being in the scene, it continues to happen. And if someone says they're not comfortable, the expectation is to be an adult, speak up when there's something that makes you uncomfortable. You don't have to tell me why it makes you uncomfortable. If you just say, hey, this is not okay, we'll move on. We'll find a way to direct it. And the only thing you have to tell me is what's not okay. Is it guns near kids, or is it specifically gunfire at the school? What makes the scene not okay, so we know what to remove, rather than having to say why it bothers you.
I think what we're getting down to right now is an issue of personality, and you have like different people at a table, and being aware of that comes up in group dynamics. So you will have one side of an argument that says, all right, you are independent of me and you are responsible for letting me know. It is your responsibility. And then you have another side that says, well, you need to be empathetic of my needs and my concerns. It's that whole touch of thinking versus feeling. A thinking person would be, well, let me think of the effect, whereas a feeling person is, well, can't you sort of tell the tone? Can't you be intuitive of this? I guess that's sort of the issue. So an X card is really more of a concept than an actual thing. Like if somebody is just looking uncomfortable at my table, I might stop and look at them and say, okay, in this moment, what are you doing? And they said, I'm just tuned out. I'm like, okay, so would your character leave? And that point, like a GM can take it upon themselves, if they don't want to directly address it, to say, if your character wanted to go somewhere, where would they go?
See, and I think that's the worst way to handle it. I'm not asking you to absent your character from what makes you as a player uncomfortable. I'm asking you as a player to say, this makes me uncomfortable, so that we can then remove whatever that thing is from the game. Because if all you do is say, I'm a little checked out right now, I don't know if that just means you're not interested tonight because of some shit that happened at work, or if you had a bad personal experience that mimics something that just happened in the game and we need to move on. And that's why I think just having that understanding, that adult moment to either raise your hand, hold up a card, whatever it is, I don't care what the agreed upon thing is, whether it's, like Jared saying he expects everybody to be willing to set a step forward and say it, or I know Jib from the green room was saying he actually fully believes in the X card and having that, do not pass go, no explanation, just move right on. Either of those is fine, but I'm going to now let you have your character go do something else. The scene is still happening with the other player characters at that point, and you're still going to be exposed to it. I don't think that helps the situation.
I can see what you're saying, Dave, and I could definitely follow along. That comes down to the whole issue of boundaries, of having someone that doesn't want to explain why they're uncomfortable. Like maybe they feel some shame as to being uncomfortable in the situation. I guess like in terms of my style, that would be a more softer way to get them out of that situation. But I think for most players, the GM is more comfortable if the player is direct and just says, hey, I don't like this situation. Can I not be a part of it? And I think most of the GMs would be like, sure, if you don't want to be a part of this, it's fine. Would you like to maybe tell me afterwards, or maybe even not even that, and be like, hey, well, I don't mean to like pry into your business, but like you seemed a little uncomfortable there. Is that something we should avoid? And they'd be like, yeah, it's not my thing.
I'm not against some, situational awareness at the table. I think also too, a lot of this comes to as part of having a game session zero discussion based on the setting you're going to run as well. To take it out of anything that I do personally, for example, running Deadlands. that takes place in an alternate universe modeled after historical events where slavery kind of still existed.
Mm-hmm.
So even Deadlands will go, hey, listen, we realize that slavery existed. We also realize this is a sensitive topic, maybe a sensitive topic, so we're hand waving that part of it. I think part of that, the GM should kind of maybe anticipate what may come up in the game and say, hey, listen, we may deal with this theme. We may deal with that theme. I don't see anything wrong with going, look, the general feel of this table in the game is going to be TVMA, or this is going to be rated R, to give some kind of general kind of understanding of what the content is likely to become. But yeah, if it becomes an hour-long description of a murder rape scene, then okay, as a GM, I would probably put the kibosh on that pretty quickly before anybody would even mention anything about having an issue with it. But I'm just saying that I'm just not a fan of the draw an X on a card and put it on the table. That's all I'm saying. I think
X card itself is just a tool. It's just a mechanism. It's no different than what you described of raise your hand and say, I'm not digging, I'm not cool with this. And we move on. It's the same exact mechanism. It's just a different tool for it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
Now,
it's a
there's
concept.
a conversation that has to go on during session 0 that is referred to as lines and veils. A veil is something that can happen in the game, but we don't want to see it. We don't really care to see that happen. Okay?
Yep.
That's a veil. A line is this does not exist in the game, does not occur in the game. Common example, rape of a child does not exist in the game. That is a line. That is a line that I will set. And I will tell you flatly, if it comes up in a game, you have about 10 seconds to put a stop to it, or I will walk away from the table.
That's fair.
Yeah, like that's the thing is, I mean, everyone has their proclivity for how they run a game. So in a game with me, you'll never see anything sexual. I just don't care. I think bringing sex to the table is immature. I'm a 45-year-old man. I don't need to mentally jerk myself off or any of the guys that I'm gaming with because I've dated women. I do shit other than play role playing. I'm being honest, right? So this is part of the X card thing. So I don't like the X card only because I think the people who invented it are little cunts and they're uppity and what's going on right now. I don't personally like those people. I understand the tool, and I do agree with Jib that there are good uses for something like that. Like, yeah, sex is ridiculous, and when people are like, well, the GMs and the gamers have an obligation, or they should say something, you have to remember, this is going to destroy the audience. Gamers, right? If you've been to a convention, or you've even just gamed with random people, most gamers sit on the spectrum of autism and fucking spurg, right? Because most gamers can't fucking register human emotions and that something is bothering someone. They can't, because they can't tell you they're running a shitty game, because in their mind they're still running the most amazing Lord of the Rings adventure ever. And that's just how most folks are. I have a command of 300 sailors, and all of them bitched on our climate survey about the same thing. Things, and no one does anything about it, meaning the leadership. But we just had an instance where 11 of them stood around listening to someone talk about sticking their dick in bread, instead of had the fucking guts or moral fortitude to fucking make a difference and say something. So this is a broader problem with just human beings in general. No one wants to be signaled out as, well, I'm the Debbie Downer, I'm the troublemaker, right? They're not going to do it. That's just, it's not what it's about. And again, yeah, I mean, everyone has their points. I will tell people flat out, we're not going to talk about sex, we're not going to talk about rape, we may murder fucking imaginary people and children and shit, but we're not going to describe it in gruesome ways and shit that makes John Wayne Gacy hard. We're not going to go that route. Also,
I'm not here for a murder porn simulator. I'm
here to play dragon killing and shit. Like, I don't know what kind of game you're running where people pull up in an RV and want to rape someone on the street. Like, that's I'd get the player the fuck
entirely on our host, because it was his character that did it.
Yeah, I would honestly, you wouldn't game with me anymore. It's just that's what would happen. Passive little puss either about shit. I would just tell you, you need to get the fuck up out of my house, and we're done.
Yeah. I got it. Yeah.
Well, okay. See, the thing is that lines and veils can be. I mean, theoretically, you know about these things up front. You know about them ahead of time.
Yeah.
However, and here's where the X card or whatever mechanism you want to use comes in, and that is, it's a thing that wouldn't ordinarily bother someone, but something has happened in their life this week that makes this thing a problem for them today. Tomorrow, might not be a problem, but today, okay? They're not being a pussy. They're not being weak. It's just this thing is hitting them wrong today. And
I disagree. They're being a little weak because they don't have that fortitude to be able to say something, right? And again, it's not just it's everyone in society. People just don't do that. There's a very rare, limited number of people who will ever take a stand.
I'm not disagreeing with your premise about humanity in general. I'm talking about an individual, in a momentary circumstance, and they are saying something. They're using the mechanism agreed on in the game to say something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and
I'm not going to force, but at the same time, I'm not going to force them to, illuminate on why this is a problem.
They shouldn't.
I don't care.
They should.
I mean, well, it's not that I don't care. It's that,
but it's that to illuminate what is the problem.
They have to say.
They should just say, "Quit, move the fuck on."
But okay, it's like, okay, that's a problem. We're going to just move on with that and step on. We'll sunset that scene and go on our way. Fine, no problem. But that does not make them a weak person.
I've got to say that we're broaching the subject not necessarily of strength and weakness, but understanding boundaries. And at that point, I like Scott has a very, very good point that people are just not aware. Like, it's like they start talking and other people are just waiting to interrupt, or like suddenly like that little 4-foot space in front of them, everything beyond that is just blurred. Okay, little bit of advice. Look at your player's face. All right? Are they making eye contact? Are they looking down? Are they looking away? Do they look distressed? Just pay attention to some body language. Like 5 minutes to just before, like at any point in your life. And Jib, I understand exactly what you're saying because yes, some people are very timid, or they're even afraid of even their own emotions. Like they don't even know where their own limits are.
Okay, we're all a bunch of fucking geeks and nerds. None of us is all that good at expressing our feelings.
Right.
None of us.
Well, it goes a step beyond that too. In you don't know who they've played with before, who ignored it when they brought it up before, and they've been forced to.
I know some. Okay, here's an example of a thing that would probably never occur to any of us to be an issue. Okay, they turn around and they're going through, for example, maybe a hospital, and they come up on a cancer ward, a ward of people who have terminal cancer, hospice situation. Okay, I happen to know someone right now today who 6 months ago this would not have ever been an issue for them. Would not have been like, okay, we're just going to truck on. We'll go on with that. Today, that would be a problem. That would probably hit them really fucking hard. And that would probably stop them dead in their tracks. Why? Because their mother just died of cancer.
Sure.
Well, I think part of this conversation too, and I don't want to turn this whole podcast into an X card discussion, but I think part of this too is what happens in the social contract in society ends up translating and coming into the game too. There's certain things that just as part of just general, how do we conduct ourselves in society apart from the game table that comes into this, to where, listen, if you're gonna play with this group, if you listen to this group of podcasters for any length of time, you get the sense that we're a bunch of wisecracking ball busters. Now, if Scott calls me gay or makes a homosexual reference, I'm not necessarily gonna get offended or go, wait, where's this coming from? I'm not gonna be shocked by that. But I don't think that in that situation, before Scott sits down and talk to anybody, he needs to go, hey, I tend to make a lot of wisecracks and sexual innuendo when I speak, so you need to be aware of that. So I don't think that translates often into a session 0 game, where you have to go, here, let's anticipate the problems that may arise, and let's break this down and have a discussion about it before we play. I totally understand that, and I get what you're saying about the X card. I don't like the X card for this reason. It smacks for me of political stuff that's going on currently in the leftist media, in the left media, in our society, where everything's accelerated and everything's cranked up to 10, and I can say things that I don't have to back up, and you're just supposed to accept it. I identify as Apache helicopter. What? No. That's the same response I get to the X card being dropped to the table as part of that discussion. I realize it's a mechanism, it's a tool. I'm just saying that the people I would choose the game with, I would appreciate them just going, hey, not right now. We need to move on. I don't. And then everybody at the table sort of might end up breaking their balls a little bit about it and then moving on. I think you kind of have to know who you're gaming with. And this happened to us recently in bringing a new person in, a couple new people into our standard Friday night group, where it didn't dawn on any of us to go, hey, say anything in character. Nobody's going to be offended. If anybody is offended, we're going to let you know about it. Because we had one of the players going, listen, I was thinking about it after the game, guys, and I'm really sorry. I kept referring to one of the female characters as a hippie chick and a crazy lady. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't offend anybody. And to all of us in the group, it was like, what? It was almost comical for us to come back and go, no, you didn't offend anybody. If this group will tell you if you have an issue. So I don't see anything.
Well, let me ask this then, Jared. You have a very mature group that you've cultivated over time. Does that factor into this? If you were another wide open door like you did 3 years ago for Dead End, and you had 37 or plus responders who suddenly walk in, this conversation and an X card type mechanic may be a necessary session 0 when you're dealing with complete unknowns. Whereas when you're dealing with the same motherfuckers you deal with every week and you add one person, there's a certain understanding that, hey, if you know this crowd, you know we're all adults, ball busters. If you join this group, that's what you're stepping into. And we've had people who've decided that they're not going to be part of the Friday night group because that's not the way they wanted to game. And that's not to say they're a weak player. It's just they don't enjoy the same style that we enjoy. I think that colors that for you in a manner that's different from like Jib, who plays at a lot of conventions and is playing with people he doesn't necessarily know, and is also playing with people who doesn't matter how well he knows, he wants to be very careful of making sure they're comfortable at the gaming table because they're long-standing friends, they're great gamers he's gamed with, before. And whereas you're more the type that, if something happens, you're going to bust their balls before you say you're sorry.
There's a certain level of fraternal bonding, I think. And if you're at a convention and you don't know anybody, you might tone it down, or you might just let it all fly out. Because
what's the point, right? Why at a convention would you even bother to fucking run a game that has rape and torture and all nonsense?
You look like a psycho.
You wouldn't walk into Walmart and be like, all right, well, I'm going to suck a dog dick and just break out and do it. You wouldn't do it.
So at a convention when people don't know each other, it makes perfect sense.
Well, and I also think too, if you're running a convention game, there's a certain bit of GM responsibility to shut that shit down.
Absolutely.
If somebody's being overly racist for no apparent reason other than to be bombastically overly racist, then it's the GM's job to sit up before the X card even hits the table and go, hey, shut that shit down.
But like with a long-standing group, you're probably going to know the people. Session 0, you're going to know the people that are there, and you're going to have an understanding of the basic level of their boundaries, and you're going to have a certain level of respect for them as a person because you're aware of who they are.
I agree. So let's continue. Go ahead.
I want an X card as a GM, so when I get those random players that I just want to throat punch, I want to put it on the table and tell them, they should shut the fuck up and move on.
I want to play an assassin.
I think that that your assassin is gonna die.
So Chris needs an O card, and Scott needs an O card that says basically, when I drop this as a GM, you're out.
Yeah, get the fuck out. Get out of my game. Leave.
No, your point's well taken, Jim. I want to say this too.
And it's the 3 strike rule. You hang them up as they're up as a
I'll say this, Jim. In the context of playing with people that I'm not familiar with, and long-standing, have a certain shorthand with socially, I see the value of having a mechanism like an X card. I do. To me, it's just like I said, it's the whole trappings of the quote-unquote X card is a system that just rubs me a little bit the wrong way. But
you don't really play with strangers, though, really, do you? I mean,
not usually. I mean, we've done it. We've done it in the past. We did Savage Saturday Nights.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of, hey, listen, this is what our expectations as you as a player in the game. We kind of set some boundaries, but we didn't have an X card in that, and it might be something that needs to be addressed. But
you want an X card or a table card that says this is a safe space? Take your choice.
So moving on. So let's start when you're talking about session 0. Let's talk about running your session 0 checklist for a group of people that you're used to gaming with and know intimately. How do you have that discussion? What's important to kind of break down and break out?
Well,
elevator pitch.
Yeah,
Sorry.
elevator.
Yeah, I was going to say elevator pitch, tone of the game. Yeah. I mean, you should kind of have an idea, I think, before you even start the session 0. Well, obviously, you should have an idea of what you're going to play. I mean, maybe you don't. Maybe a session 0 involves what you're going to play as well. But, I mean, if you have some ideas of kind of what you're going to do ahead of time, so, you're going to throw out Deadlands, 50 Fathoms, Buccaneer. You're going to throw out 3 or 4 games ahead of time via email, via text, whatever. Get your group to kind of, mull it over, talk about it, see what they want to play, and then that'll help you with your session 0. You can, because you're gonna need to set some expectations, and hopefully you won't get people like Jared had gotten in the Dead End game, the Monday night game, who you gave those expectations to, and they totally gave you the big fuck you and did whatever they wanted.
Well, I mean, that you always run that risk, right?
You do, and I think you run the risk more when you're not face to face. I think when you're running remotely and running on a VTT, you really have a chance to have those types of issues, where people are just like, you're not there telling them that no, they can't play an assassin when you specifically said everybody has to be good guys who work for a detective agency.
Well, no, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I think this goes back to kind of what Scott was saying with the X card. Is that's a greater societal thing that the internet makes everything worse.
It does. I agree.
That veil of anonymity that goes with the internet, and people are the worst version of themselves online because their name and face aren't attached to that thing, and they don't have to live with the consequences if they're an asshole to you in a VTT game. They can just move on and find another VTT game to play in. If they are an asshole to you at the local gaming store, everyone in the store just saw them be an asshole, and they're not going to get to play in anybody's game.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
For the Asperger conversation. They'll still play.
There's a certain expectation that we don't play with assholes, but I mean, people play with assholes all the time too. So,
well, it's really a spectrum. I mean, it's kind of on a spectrum.
It's how far you can stretch it.
Chris brings up a good point, and something that I've been struggling with a little bit as far as session 0, and that's after everybody's agreed on the type of game they're going to play. I almost want to hear concrete character concepts from each player at that group before they start creating characters.
Yeah. Now, do you do? So I usually do like an elevator pitch. All right, you're members of a guild of adventurers or tomb robbers. You're returning home. because your mentor suddenly died. Talk about what characters you want to make. Right.
I'm gonna throw this one out there. No, he doesn't. He goes, "We're playing this setting. What do you want to play?" And there's no information about what the preamble is of the unspoken stuff that happens before the game starts. So, like in our most recent Friday night group, that was the concept of what happened before the game starts ended up being a conversation among the players during session 0. And so it's not to say one's a good way, one's a bad way. But if you're going to do more the Jared style of we're playing Deadlands, what are you guys playing? Then you have to allow the players to come up with why their characters are together at the start of the game and some kind of eponymous goal that they're trying to achieve in the short term for why they're together so that you have a jumping off point. Sure. Because otherwise, I think your game's just doomed to spiral out of control because we've seen that happen several times. You don't
I prefer
consensus between the GM and the players.
Yeah, I think it's better, almost better, if the group themselves come up for a reason. If the GM just asks that as an open-ended rhetorical question, why are you guys all together? What reason? What reason are you guys all together? This is the kind of setting we're going to play. We'll probably start with the general idea. This is kind of be the first session, kind of how it will start. Why would your guys? What are your character concepts? Why are you together? What are your character concepts? I think Jib has said it in the past that one of the best ways to kind of do that is forgive me if I'm not getting the wording right, Jib. Something like, this is the kind of world and game that we're playing. Create characters that would be involved in that.
Yeah, here's the world, kind of world we're in. Here's what's going on in the game. Make a character who would get involved in that. If they don't do that, they get to sit and watch while the other characters are doing things. Because I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on them because they want to be a snowflake.
I've cashed out whole games repeatedly because of that exact thing. I said, this is the game we're playing. This is the general concept. Your students at East Texas University, make a character who is a average college student who would get involved with the unknown. And then I get, wild characters from everything. And I have players who say, well, my character wouldn't get involved with that because it would ruin their GPA. Okay, then. After 4 sessions of that, with 3 different people all having reasons why their characters checked out, I canceled the game. There's no reason for all of us to play if the characters aren't involved with the game you're playing. So I think
why would you even? Yeah, you wouldn't even. Why waste your time?
Well, I think there's an aspect of that if you drop a concept in the middle of the table, like Scott saying with the elevator pitch, there's an understanding. The players have to come halfway and meet.
Right.
That's why I do. Yeah.
Well, and you can have that conversation. Here's the other thing too that I've experienced as well. You can have that conversation. You go, listen, we're playing and focusing on the survival horror aspect of a zombie outbreak. You are ordinary, average, everyday people. You're not Bruce Willis badass. What is your character concept? I'm an ex-Vietnam vet, demolition sniper. Shut the fuck up. No, you're not. Did you not just hear what I said?
I'm ordinary.
Obviously, they're going to be playing a teenage Japanese girl who's part of a ninja clan.
Right. Or I'm a high
character.
Wait a minute. And I've had this. Wait a minute. Why? What? Your character's a high school football quarterback. Why does he have survival at a D8? Oh, he was a Boy Scout. He was a Boy Scout. Oh, fuck you. No, he doesn't have a survival D8.
Rationalizations happen all the fucking time when you corner somebody on that. So
he better be an Eagle Scout.
So
maybe he camped a lot.
I know Jared's answer to this, but I'm going to ask the other 3 GMs on the panel. Do you challenge the character the player hands you? If it's within points, it's a legal character. Do you challenge the choices they've made and the character they've built, or is that their agency?
Yes, I absolutely will.
You met us?
I will absolutely look at a character and go, and so how is it that they're involved in this situation? Explain that to me. Explain to me why they have this ability. Okay. Now, by and large, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. In the example that Jared was just giving, if he says he was a Boy Scout, I'm like, just spend the points on it. Okay, carry on. Carry on. Go on with yourself. Now, I'm going to then leverage that to challenge some other assumptions that they've made.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, okay, so you're a Boy Scout. Okay. How can I then lean on that to make life painful for them?
Oh, so go ahead and take the code of honor hindrance for your Boy Scout training of being kind, courteous, polite, eager, ready to help.
Exactly. Like,
Eager and willing to help in the zombie apocalypse. Lovely character.
But then again, the players that I tend to get from my campaign games. Now, one-shots and conventions are different. It's a different animal. But for my campaign games, the players that I get tend to look for ways to screw their characters and make life difficult for their characters. So I don't have to help them with that, really.
Nice.
Chris, Dustin.
Yeah, I would say that I've done it a few times, but not as often as I should. You know, since I've been on the show and heard you guys talk about it all the time, I'd say I've done it more so because again, we kind of go back to the same things, but you know that assassin never would have happened if it would have been a year ago. But it was longer than that, so you know, I don't think it's a problem. But again, I think that if they can come up with a reason why, and it's not completely absurd, and I guess it depends on what you're thinking completely absurd is, but I mean, a high school quarterback who has a survival of D8 and says he was a Boy Scout and camped all. I mean, to me, that would be fine. I would let that go.
See, here's the deal with. I'm sorry, I was just going to make an observation.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we got a guy who's a high school quarterback for the football team. That means he's physically fit, capable. Okay. Who are the bad guys going to go after first?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing too. So in that example too, this is a character. So I'm a high school football quarterback. Had a D4 in throwing, but a D8 in survival. That's when you go,
no.
Wait a minute, what?
I would have said, yeah, probably ought to swap those because
right, sure.
Yeah.
Eagle Scout's going to teach you some knots and how to build a fire, where to pitch a tent. It's not going to teach you how to distill water from thin air using a tarpaulin.
Actually, it does. Actually, it does.
It does, yeah.
Well,
it does.
Okay, but
you just you dig a hole and you put a rock in the middle.
Okay, but
in the thing happens to be in the book.
In the example above, that is a character trying to find a metagame workaround to being effective going in, knowing that we're going to be playing in a zombie apocalypse.
Sure.
That's what that is. And when you call them on it and go, wait a minute, then the rationalization comes that I was a Boy Scout. And you go, yeah, not at a D8 you weren't.
Right, sure.
So.
Sure. I mean, maybe
I think there's another aspect of this that we're getting very deep in the Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, survival D8 at. But I mean, I'll challenge the guy who comes to the table with nothing but D4s and everything, because he's doing that metagame thing of I'm going to roll dice every time the GM asks for someone to do a skill. I'm going to call him on that because one, you're not going to share the spotlight with anybody else, and two, it's not a fun character to play.
Yeah, because they're not good at anything. Like, if you have a D4, your character is not good at anything. And you're not thinking about the negative penalties. So when I have players who do this, I'm
you punch him in the kidney.
Well, I'm more kick them in the face, but I'm a no but or a yes and type. So like we were saying before, it's like, okay, well, no, I'm thinking you wouldn't have a D8 in survival, because here's what happens is if you're a quarterback, you got to spend a lot of time, so you don't have enough time to practice. So maybe you drop it down to a D6. I'll let you have a D6 in survival. You have a D6 in throwing too. That makes sense to me. But you are going to have to take a hindrance. I mean, let's kind of hash this out. What makes sense for the character?
Yeah. Okay, so the guy's got a D8 in survival and a D4 in throwing. So you were a shitty quarterback. How'd you make the college team?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
You were
that
the
is a good
third
question.
string quarterback in a high school your senior year.
All right, quit talking about my character in my ETU game. Shut up, all of you.
I think in Savage Worlds, it's very hard for players who aren't used to the point buy system to go from concept to mechanical translation, and not just from what skill points they spend, but the hindrances they take. Where in some cases they take and we've talked about this before, take the hindrance name too literally, or don't understand that the hindrances are not pigeonholed. They're actually very open to interpretation. For example, you could play a pacifist hindrance and then have the bloodthirsty major against orc because your family was slaughtered by orcs. So whenever you see an orc, you just lose your shit and kill orcs indiscriminately. That
Sure.
could, I mean, it's part. We're talking about concept, the going from concept to created character in Savage Worlds. So I don't see a problem in. I wouldn't say necessarily challenging a player's character that they hand you, but more just asking them to explain it.
It's
I guess
clarifying.
it's challenging it. I guess it's challenging it. Like, wait a minute.
Don't walk it back. Don't feel like you have to be on the defensive, Jared.
Don't backpedal now. But you know, there's also the clarifying. What does that mean to you? Because, for example, in my pirate game that I'm doing right now, one of the characters is a pirate, but has the pacifist hindrance. I'm like, what does that mean to you? That means that I'm not going to engage in violence unless someone attacks me directly. Okay, got it. We can do that. It's a minor hindrance. Done. Problem solved. Okay. It's a clarifying question.
And if you guys had this problem where someone takes a hindrance and overplays it,
yes,
and you have to have that session 0 discussion with them. Like, hey, I see you have pacifist on here. You do realize I'll reward you when you're a pacifist, but this does not mean you can't do that thing in the game. You're not signing yourself up for instant slaughter every time combat breaks out. It's when you choose to be a pacifist, you're going to get a Benny reward.
Right.
And it may not be every single time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just because someone is a pacifist does not mean there's no possible way they would ever engage in violence. It just means they don't want it.
Right.
It means that that's not their go-to. That's not what the first thing they think about.
Well, I think if we're talking about challenging players, we're not so much about challenging as this. Let me take your character concept is what for this game. Okay, let me safety check it for how it's going to interact with the other player characters, and it's basically show me the math. I know you got the answer, but how did you arrive there? I want to make sure that your thinking in your concept is sound, that it makes sense more than anything else. I think players can interpret that as a GM going, why are you GM being a dick and going, hey, no, dude, you're stepping on my agency. I get to create my character. I get to spend my points. I think it's just misunderstood a lot of times as a GM being an asshole and going, no.
Look, man, I was on a mission from Tokyo as a ninja when the apocalypse hit. Clearly, I'm stranded here. Fuck you. I'm a ninja.
Right.
No, you can't
by all
play
means,
a ninja.
And I'm hanging out with these battered housewives and pizza delivery boys for camouflage.
Yes. There are my hit points.
I don't have to be faster than the zombies. I have to be faster than the housewife I kneecap while I'm running from zombies.
You know,
okay,
if
so
you are not faster than the zombies, you have got a major problem.
Or a
major hindrance.
One-legged.
Right? You know what would be great is if you run a zombie game and somebody has the lame hindrance and they're hobbling and the zombies just pass right on by.
Monday Night Group had a character that was paralyzed from the waist down. He was in a wheelchair.
What?
Oh,
really? Okay.
Got run over by a car, I believe, didn't he, Jared?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be laughing at
Listen,
this.
I don't play verisimilitude necessarily in my games, but I don't play characters have plot armor either. So
Yeah, I mean,
you're in a wheelchair. Okay, so you're crossing the street. Give me a notice roll. Ooh, you don't see this truck coming.
So that brings up a good point. Should session 0 have a conversation about character death?
Yeah.
Abso-fucking-lutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Say, hey, this is what we're not gonna fudge the dice. We're gonna roll out in the open, and if your character gets a case of the dead, your character gets a case of the deads.
So
And
let's.
are you going to
yeah.
be able to handle that?
Let's talk about that. Let's each one of us talk about our top 3 must-have conversations and checklists for a session 0. My first one is tone and character concept expectations. Number 2, here's how we deal with player character death. Number 3, I don't fudge. Nothing's rolled behind the screen. Everybody rolls out in the open, and we run pretty close to rules as written. Feel free to bring up a conversation if it's going to result in a major narrative issue like a character death. Then we'll flip the book open and take a look. But otherwise, moving on. But yeah, in the conversation of character death, absolutely. Is it, first of all, you kind of have to ask yourself, does it fit the tone of the game we're playing? If you're playing Flash Gordon, you really worried about character death?
Right. Use heroes never die.
Yeah, you're really going to have that conversation? Probably not. You're probably going to go, hey, you don't have to worry about death in this game unless it's dramatically appropriate.
That's still a conversation about character death, though. You're
I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah.
You're setting an expectation.
Yeah. Now
you're saying these are the boundaries. These are the ways and the whats and the hows in the game.
go ahead.
So my top 3 are: what's the game about? Okay. What are any special rules that we are using for this game? Example, gritty damage. We're using gritty damage for this game. Be aware. Understand what that means. And what everybody's expectations are.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said so far. And the other thing that I would put out there, bet you're going to be able to figure out what I'm about to say. Talk about your goddamn electronics. Have that electronics discussion. Yeah, if you're using it for game purposes, cool. If your child fell and broke his leg, yeah, you might need to take that call. If you're sitting there playing Clash of Clans or some fucking game with your volume up, that's a problem. So set those expectations. Have that expectation, and it never works, but it's good to have it.
Chris, that's just a commentary that you're not a good GM from that player who's no longer involved or having fun in the game.
Oh yeah, fuck that player.
I think that falls into the heading of table rules, right? House rules, not table rules, house rules. So, as an example of my zombie apocalypse game, I've told everybody, hey, if you're not going to make the session, I need to know. You need to do the courtesy of letting me know before the game. If there's something comes up, take 10 seconds, send a text, shoot an email, do something. If you don't notify me, don't bother coming back. Your character's dead. If you can't make it and you notify me, thanks for letting us know. The game's still going and we're playing you as an allied extra. Show up next week to see if your character survived.
Well, I think that would be one of my 3 is how do we handle attendance issues? At what point do we call the game into something else? Is it if 3 people are out the same week, we're not going to play that week, kind of a thing? What's the expectation for how far in advance people have to give notice that they're going to miss the game? Because, I've had a game where there was no advance notice required, but if you didn't at least touch base, 3 sessions, you were out because we weren't going to sit there constantly having to NPC your character along with the party. At that point, just that character separates himself from the group, and I look for a new player to join the group because I've got room now.
Yeah. See, I don't. I want them to tell me ahead of time, but if they don't tell me ahead of time, they get 3 shots, and then they go away. I do not NPC their character. It's like that character is just not present. Don't know why.
Yeah, we always say they're in the brain fog.
You know, don't know why. That they're just not there. And then, and the way this ends up working out, 2 sessions ago in the pirate game, they had to have a big face-to-face conversation with the person who was, their fence that they sold all their goods to, and they were dependent on, and they didn't have the player of their face character there. So they had to figure out how to do that without their main face character. The very next session, they had a big fight without their big fighty character.
Well, I think an interesting aspect of that, and I've never been a fan of the rest of the party runs you as an allied extra, simply because I don't think it can ever capture the role play aspect. Right. Scott's character run by Scott versus Scott's character run by the panel of GMs is going to act completely differently. And for that reason, I've never been comfortable with it. But unfortunately, in some situations, like I know with Jared's zombie game, it absolutely makes sense. No, that character is still traveling with the group, and you don't just hand wave them away because there's a level of verisimilitude in the tracking of ammo, the tracking of food, the tracking of water, the long-term, healing and just the downtrodden survival nature of that game. Putting them in the mind fog doesn't work as easy in that game. So I can definitely see why Jared has the rule.
Sure.
But it's never been one that I use at my table unless I absolutely have to. Yeah. Though I will say this, one of the other things I'll always have during that session 0 conversation is a expectation of, hey, these are the ways we're running the rules in the book. If there's something I know that I've run a certain way and people have gone, hey, that's not the way I interpreted that rule. If I've had it happen more than 3 times, that becomes part of a session 0 with a new player, so they know, hey, apparently I run chases differently than everyone you've ever played with. So when this happens, I'm going to draw a card from here and tell you what happens or whatever. Whatever the particular mechanic is that's come up, and there's only been 2, and it's predominantly the way I handle fear and the fact that I do dramatic tasks with a lot of descriptive between the cards. I can't do the dry card, success, fail, move on.
Well, the other thing that Dave and I both do in our games too is if you get your first 5 successes in your first 2 card draws, we keep drawing cards because complications can still happen.
Yeah,
shit can still go sideways. Yeah,
failure on a complication fails the dramatic task. It doesn't matter how many successes you had.
Yeah, it's 5 successes over 5 card draws, not we're done once you hit 5 successes. So
and I'm glad that I've actually been tuning into the podcast because that was something that I was doing wrong. I was actually drawing 2 cards and I'm like, okay, you win. Congratulations. But
I will not go so far as to say you were doing it wrong.
Yeah, me either.
No, I would say
as the rule is written is ambiguous enough that you could say as soon as they hit 5 successes, the dramatic task's over. You could also say, no, they have to go through all 5 card draws and deal with any complications that go on.
That's true.
Savage Worlds, because of that whole, 199 pages or whatever restriction on the core book, there's a lot of things that there's some interpretation differences among.
Hopefully the black version will clear that up.
Yeah, right.
At any rate, I feel like, looking back on it, I feel like I was doing it wrong. And having become aware of the option of, okay, you should go because you will still fail if you crit fail on a club, then you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And for creating tension, so that's why I feel like I was not doing it right.
So Scott, what are your top 3 must-have conversation checkpoints in a session 0?
Jesus, yeah, it's going to be, we're just going to talk about the things that I'm personally never going to bring up in the game. I think that helps put people at ease. We're definitely going to have a conversation about, here's some of the, here's the rules, here's sort of where I see the game going, what do you guys like or not like about that. Character death is a big one because you have people who just don't absolutely want to see characters die. I'll try to convince them that it's okay for their character to die because no one really cares. It's sometimes better for the story, and then I'll tell them that we're actually going to do like a mini game for creating those backgrounds. I'm not going to sit around and listen to 4 to 5 uncreative people try to fiddle fuck their way through. We meet in a tavern is ultimately where we're going to go. I'm going to help facilitate that conversation and we're going to have a good time doing it. And once they see it in action, everyone usually responds pretty well and they start really getting into it. And it kickstarts that imagination better than, oh, well, Chris, you're an elf, I guess. So I'll be your friend.
Is that your using of microscope?
Ranger? No, sometimes I've used microscope, but I found microscope is actually kind of weak sauce when it comes down to it. It's a really weird. I like microscope in the principle, but not in the full execution. Backstory cards are pretty good with that, but again, they get really weird in how they want them used. But if you just use them sort of as indicators, but also if you want to stick Savage Worlds purity players, right? I'll deal 3 cards to every person face down and say, okay, the card on your left is for the player on your left, the card on your right is for the player to your right, and the card in the middle is for the player across from you. And when you flip them up, it's essentially an interlude. Like, okay, well, when you met player A, there was something about combat or victory or something was involved in this. Let's have a conversation about what that was and how it pertains to the elevator pitch that we are going on with this game. And you can do that pretty rapidly.
That's a great idea.
I like that.
Yeah, it sounds good.
You're
basic
essentially
character
doing
creation
the
is
crossing
play.
paths step of Fate character creation.
Yeah.
I suppose so. I have no idea.
Yeah, you are. You
Cool.
are.
Well, it's also the idea of character creation is play is done really more in play rather than an intellectual exercise. Which
I think that's an important thing with Session Zero is Session Zero can still be fun. I think a lot of people don't run a Session Zero because they're so afraid that it's going to be 5 people at a table all looking down at their character sheets and glancing into books, not saying anything, not talking to each other, not interacting. And if that's your Session Zero, you as the GM are doing it wrong because if there's no conversation, you're not actually accomplishing anything that you could have accomplished by saying, roll up characters and show up on Friday.
It's interesting. We do a lot of actual plays on the Happy Jacks cast. And so we do a lot of, we've got a lot of Session Zero character creation sessions. And Stu keeps going, well, I don't want to air those because, they're boring as hell. And yet they're some of our most popular episodes. And the fan base is always like, no, we want to hear that. Yeah. We want to hear that part.
Oh, absolutely.
So
to a certain extent, I think some of what we talked about at the top of the show about the social interaction issues, I think that is why actual plays that show a Session Zero where there is communication at the table, where there is that building of a actual party instead of building of 5 individual characters, I think those are very popular because it gives people an example to go by that have been playing in isolation since the 70s.
Yeah. And that's where it kind of gets fun. One of the things that I always do when I start a new campaign is I tell my players, come up with 2 NPCs. Come up with 2 NPCs and tell me about how you're related to them. Like, what do they have to do with you? And, Scott, like you do, like that whole, what's this? That kind of is like a brainstorming session for them as well, because they create a backstory and they flesh out their own characters. I trick my players into creating sort of a character that they can have fun with. And sometimes you get these people that are like stuck. I'm like, why don't you ask the person on your left what kind of characters they have? Maybe they could know you. Maybe you can know them. How do your characters know each other? Like, what are they connected with? And sometimes with my characters, like I'll hear their concept. That sounds good. Let me tell you about someone that your character would know from their history.
I run a little bit differently, and I'm just going to share this because of just the way I tend to run. I tend to tell player characters I want 2 sentences that describe who your character is, not what they look like, not what their driver's license photo stats are, not what their job is. I mean, if that's integral to the character, their career or job is integral to their identity, fine, give it to me. But I want a 2-sentence blurb that tells me who the character is and how society interacts with them, that you could hand to an actor auditioning for the role, and then hand him a script, and they can read that and go, got it. I understand this guy's motivations. I know who he is. And then the reason I enforce that is I don't want a 7-paragraph backstory pre-written, because then I'm trying to round hole square peg that backstory into it, and it's not it. You paint yourself into a corner.
I was gonna say,
With that backstory. Let it grow organically throughout gameplay. So at some point, for example, and I'll quote this again because, well, I've quoted it before. Dave's character concept for the first Dead End, perfect example. Harry is a garbage man, obese middle-aged garbage man with no life ambition beyond his hobbies of fishing, dumpster diving, and ham radio. That tells me that informs everything you need to know about that character. Is he in a committed relationship? I doubt it. I don't know many women who find no ambition in a man sexy. Wrong with the stick around. I don't think he's throwing around some big
dumpster diving's the turn on it, huh?
Yeah, I don't think he's spreading around some big coin or necessarily overly concerned about how he dresses, or his personal hygiene standards might be a little, I don't know, relaxed.
To say the least.
It not only tells me who the character is in role play and character background, but it also is a very good template for him to pick his hindrances and edges, skills. It kind of informs all of that. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of, I need your complete backstory. Who is your family? Where do you come from? Because a lot of it, when you're just starting in session 0, you may not know.
Well,
so leave it open and let the character go, oh, I know that NPC. Give them the narrative control to go, hey, if anything hits you in stride in the story that you want to incorporate as part of your background, feel free to speak up. That character's my boyfriend.
I think it was one of you guys who mentioned at one time that you got a backstory for a novice character, and he was a general of an army.
Yeah, it was right.
Me. Yeah,
and that story has always stuck with me, big time, because it's like, you're a novice character. Don't paint yourself into that box, and that's really stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And I try to think about that when I create characters, and I try to get people to think about that. So thank you, Jib, if that was you.
Yeah,
General Hux.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that someone could never be a general and be incompetent at it. That's totally, not only is that totally a possible thing, that also makes for some really interesting possibilities in the game. But having a first level, a novice character who is a great general, and they led the kingdom's army to these great victories and blah blah blah. I'm like, no, doesn't sell. That doesn't sell.
Well, and I think too that when a GM is faced with, let's say I got 6 players in a regular game. Really, I got to try to find a way to incorporate and tap everybody's backstory, make it fit together, and then put that in the game we're playing. No, I'm sorry, I'm lazy. I'm just not going to do that work.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Guys, I'm sorry. I've got to drop. I've got to be on the other side of the county and at the top of the hour. So
sure, no problem.
Take care, guys.
See you next time.
The reverse issue of, so who is your character? Well, he's a pacifist veteran with the Prime for the Apocalypse edge, and I took shooting at a D8 and driving at a D6 and throwing it at D4 because he's been through basic training and he knows how to throw a hand grenade. No. I said, who is your character, not what can they do.
Right.
And I think that you get a lot of that from players who get tunnel vision on the jargon and the mechanics, and they have skipped the step of coming up with who the character is, which is because in other games, so much of those mechanics are predefined. Your character is a fighter, so now you can take the time to to give him a personality. In Savage Worlds, there's work to assemble all those mechanics, and people are skipping the step that's most important to create the personality first.
Right, and we talked about this too. The summary for character creation that exists in the core rules right now doesn't focus on concept first. It goes up, start assigning your points for attributes, skills, edges, hindrances, gear. It never mentions anything about what's your character concept.
And I think that might get tweaked.
I have heard that might make it into Savage Worlds Black.
Kind of a couple of different ways to do it, maybe, or change that chart around. Yeah, because we've talked about that. Because I think you need to worry about edges and hindrances before you ever worry about attributes and skill points. Because those edges and hindrances change that.
Or you're
inform that, but in the book as written, they're after picking all your attributes and spending your points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little backwards. I mean, you kind of get used to it. It's not. I won't necessarily say it's wrong. It just kind of influences that style of, okay, I'm building an effective role play meta character, Mary Sue, and never mentions. Wait, what's your concept? Hold on, what's your character concept?
And not just concepts, role. Like you cannot be 4 barbarians in a party.
Oh, you absolutely can.
You can.
Don't pigeonhole that shit.
Okay.
I mean,
shitty game.
Not if you're playing beasts and barbarians.
That's true. That's true statement. If you want to have like a Conan the Barbarian shit, yeah, I mean,
yeah. If I'm playing beasts and barbarians, damn straight, I'm going to have a whole group of barbarians.
All right. So, am I the only one that runs into this problem? Every time I run Deadlands Noir, nobody wants to be the investigator. Really?
That's fucking weird.
Everybody wants to be like, they want to be a psyker or they want to be a grifter. I got a guy that wants to be a bootlegger. I had one guy that wanted to be like king of the mafia. That turned out swimming.
With the black hand, or
well, I think that goes back to our session 0 about, hey, this is what this game is about.
Yeah.
It's about private eyes in the 1940s.
Dustin, meet Chris. Chris, please explain to Dustin what happens when in your Deadlands Noir game you let someone play an assassin.
It doesn't make a damn bit of sense.
I had someone play an assassin waitress. Like she was a 16-year-old girl.
Of course she was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Of course he was.
Yes.
Correct. Shocking how I knew that.
So,
you knew who that was who did that?
Dustin, you did it wrong. Yes, you're the only one having that problem because we've all moved past that one and don't let that shit happen in our games anymore. Although, if you go back a couple of years in the podcast, you'll see I did it in ETU and let a player get away with playing a 15-year-old Japanese schoolgirl who had Doogie Howsered her way into college. You know,
I make it a rule now. No more Japanese schoolgirls. Like, that's like, I'm sorry.
The player was at least.
Don't be sorry.
A Japanese woman.
Oh.
No, it's all part of learning what not to do, right? I mean, that's just as important as learning what to do. And once again, it goes back to that discussion about, listen, this is the game we're playing. I think that if your players don't get it, you need to start talking about tropes and other media that they're familiar with, possibly to get that point across. It's like, listen, this is a zombie apocalypse. It's not Bruce Willis Die Hard in the zombie apocalypse. If you're trying to set that tone and go, this is not a high action, over the top, high action adventure game. That's not what we're going for. That's not the kind of story we're trying to tell. I think you need to really, if you're going to play Deadlands, Noir, classic Deadlands, you need to kind of very succinctly describe what the world is.
Yeah.
To the players that they're about to step into.
Well, some people have a hard concept, especially Deadlands Noir throws people for a loop, you know?
I think so too. I don't think the game really, I don't think at a first reading that you really get the concept that there's a heavy investigation game.
No, and if you are out there and you want to play Deadlands Noir and you don't really have an idea of how to convey that, there's a movie. It was on HBO. You can probably find it anywhere right now, called Cast a Deadly Spell, and this is exactly what it's about. It's from, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't know, like early 90s. And it is a noir detective setting where magic is real, and the dude has to investigate sorcerous happenings in the city.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could always say, basically, hey, we're playing the Dresden Files.
Right.
Yeah, right? That will help.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's a issue that happens only to Deadlands Noir. It's just it's very apparent in Deadlands Noir. I mean, you can see the same thing in, we just talked about this last week. A bunch of people sit down and they're going to play a Pirates game, and there's the discussion of who gets to play the captain, because if there's going to be a pirate ship and there's going to be a pirate crew, there's got to be a captain.
Make that shit an NPC.
Give it to the craziest person in the entire group.
Well,
just the guy that's a friggin' afraid of fish. Just make him the captain.
Well, it's not about how do you handle the individual situation. It's about, as a GM, be prepared to have a conversation with your players to say, those are all great character concepts, but at least one of you needs to be the lead investigator. At least one of you needs to be a pirate if you're gonna be a pirate crew. At least one of you needs to be a student if we're playing ETU. You can absolutely say, this is the world, and at least one of you needs to fit that world. If not, all freaking whole party needs to fit that world. And I'm not necessarily saying, Deadlands Noir, everyone's the investigator. No, that doesn't always work. Somebody might be an investigative journalist, another guy might be a grifter, and the final guy is the actual detective. And the journalist isn't investigating the murder as much as they're investigating the murder and the detective. And you set that expectation during character creation. Hey, as a journalist, you're probably just as interested in why he's interested in this case as you are the case itself. Set those notes to your players to inform their role play so that their character that they develop to fit in the world, now they give them the hook that pulls that character even tighter.
And I would say this, especially if you're playing a new setting that your group may not be familiar with, or you're playing with people that aren't part of your regular gaming group that you don't know, or you're creating a new gaming group. There's nothing wrong with session 0 as a GM to prepare some very loosely sketched out archetypes.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with going, okay, so this character is an investigator. This character is the lounge singer, femme fatale. These are the common archetypes and roles and types of characters. And then, do the Savage Worlds thing where you pull out, here's what I'm going to build this type of character. And then, here's a few more extra points for skills. Pick your hindrances. But these are the kind of edge and attribute and skill combination you need to play an investigator, to play the voodoo guy or whatever. And so because I think there's a big assumption that we're dealing with people as players who know exactly what they're doing and are well experienced and very great role players who are just ready to play. And I think that's a false assumption in a lot of cases. You can look at somebody and go, what's your concept? Dog walker? I don't know.
Well, take a look at the Tour of Darkness book that Peg released for the basically Weird Wars Vietnam. And in the character creation section, it actually says, if you choose the Marines as the branch of the service that you're in, that your character is in, here are the requirements your character must have stat-wise to be a Marine. Here's the requirements to be an Army Ranger. Here's the it's completely okay for you as the GM to prepare informed archetypes that maybe you don't present them as archetypes. You say, these are the minimum requirements to be X in this world. ETU, your character wants to be the quarterback of the football team. They've got a minimum they have to meet to be good enough to be the quarterback of the football team. They show up with a D4 throwing. That ain't happening, Jack. There's somebody else that's fought a lot harder to be in a Texas college who plays football better than they do.
Right.
There's like random people from the community that will just break his kneecap to get a better player in that position. Like don't understand Texas football. They
Hey.
will hurt people.
My second string ETU quarterback character just became first string because the other quarterback graduated.
Oh, he wasn't sacrificed as part of a ritual? Oh,
No.
Chris.
Hey, I'm not running the game.
He didn't disappear under spurless circumstances in ETU? No, we were at a bonfire party right before the big game. Then he just walked into the woods naked, and we never heard from him again. Oh, it looks like you're up.
I'm sorry, no ETU character will ever hold a candle to the foreign exchange student dressed as a blood elf at the Halloween party in our freaking actual play. Sometimes characters are just perfect.
Yeah, Siri, how do you exercise a demon?
I don't know, Jared. Maybe have them do push-ups.
No, Siri responds, there are 4 restaurants in your area that serve Thai food.
Here are several links related to exercise.
Right.
And that
That's
was
not the question I asked. Your accent's too... Siri should go, I'm sorry, your accent's too thick. I don't understand what you're saying.
right.
Oh my!
And I think a big part of session 0, and we'll kind of like close the loop on this unless there's some chatter from the live stream that we want to address. I think one of the most important things you can do as part of session 0, as part of that checklist, is explain your role as a GM to the players. It's like, yes, I role play the antagonist. It's my job to create tension and conflict in the game. I'm not necessarily out to kill your character, but I am going to bring consequences to bear when you do things. So if you run the city guard through, expect some shit to happen. And that's not me being a dick GM trying to kill your character. That's me enforcing the consequences of the world based on your actions. There's a great saying. It's like, well, you did this to me. You're my character. No, I didn't. I'm not Santa Claus. What you got is what you deserved because you decided to do this and take this action. So I think there needs to be a little bit of communication about, hey, I'm a player in this game too. I want to see you guys succeed. I want everybody to have fun. So don't assume that as a GM, I'm out to kill your character. Unless, of course, I state that, hey, very good high likelihood that I will kill your character in this type of game we're playing.
One thing I would add is don't be afraid to hold a session 0.5, say 2 sessions into the campaign, and just do a temperature check, especially when playing with new people. Hey, is there any mechanics that are working differently than you expected? Is your character not working right? Does everything feel like it meshes with the party? Does your character have motivation to get involved? That sort of thing. Be willing to do that just as a quick temperature check. And be willing if somebody says no, they have an issue, to stop, and instead of running session 3, run 0.5 and let people kind of clean that stuff up. It typically only takes maybe a half hour to correct whatever's wrong, and then you can pick right back up with what you had planned for the night.
I agree.
I would agree with that.
Dustin, anything else in the chat that we want to
Well, Sunset Sam has got some very good points. He says, why not take examples from media? That's a good way to relate metaphors, I suppose. And people need guideposts. They're not all creative.
A fact.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and shut it down for the night. Thanks for tuning in. This is Jared Savage, Daddy Gunning. Until next time, saying for Chris, Dave, Dustin, and Scott, keep rolling and stay savage.